The transport ship shuddered as it broke through the thick atmosphere of a world that existed solely to break spirits and end lives. Dr. Sarah pressed her 6-year-old daughter Emma closer to her chest, feeling the child's small heart beating rapidly against her ribs. Around them, dozens of other human prisoners sat in resigned silence, their faces bearing the hollow look of those who had already accepted their fate. Sarah hadn't accepted anything yet. The hegemony had been efficient in their conquest of Earth's outer colonies, efficient and brutal. They had swept through the rim worlds like a plague, enslaving some populations and sending others to places like. Sarah still didn't understand why she and Emma had been spared immediate execution. Perhaps it was because Emma was young, or perhaps the aliens had simply needed to fill a quota for their prison world. The ship's bay doors opened with a pneumatic hiss, and the acrid smell of sulfur and decay flooded in. Sarah's nose wrinkled involuntarily. She had studied xenobiology for 15 years before the war, had atmospheric compositions of dozens of worlds, but nothing had prepared her for the assault on her senses that was. "Mama," Emma whispered, her small voice barely audible over the sounds of prisoners being herded toward the exit. "I'm scared." "I know, sweetheart," Sarah murmured, smoothing down Emma's dark hair. "But remember what we talked about. We watch, we learn, and we survive. Can you be brave for Mama?" Emma nodded solemnly, her green eyes wide but determined. Sarah felt a surge of pride mixed with heartbreak. No 6-year-old should have to be brave in a place like this. The errand guards were waiting outside the ship. They stood nearly 8 feet tall, their exoskeletons gleaming dully in the pale light of the system's twin suns. Their faces were hidden behind ceremonial masks that bore the twisted features of ancient war gods, but Sarah could see their 4 compound eyes glittering with what she had learned to recognize as barely contained aggression. "Move," one of them barked in heavily accented standard. The universal translator implanted behind Sarah's ear turned the clicking and chittering of their native language into words she could understand, though the hatred in their tone needed no translation. The prisoners shuffled forward in a ragged line. Sarah kept Emma close, her hand resting protectively on her daughter's shoulder. The ground beneath their feet was hard-packed earth mixed with something that crunched ominously with each step. Sarah tried not to think about what it might be. They were marched through a settlement that could barely be called a town. Ramshackle buildings made from scavenged metal and local stone lined muddy streets. Other prisoners moved about their daily routines, their clothes patched and dirty, their faces gaunt with malnutrition. Some looked up as the new arrivals passed, but most kept their eyes down. Sarah noticed that many of them bore scars, and more than a few were missing limbs. The procession stopped in front of a large amphitheater carved directly into a hillside. The structure was clearly ancient, predating the current hegemony occupation by centuries, perhaps. Symbols covered the walls, alien script that hurt to look at directly. Sarah's xenobiology training kicked in automatically, details, searching for patterns, trying to understand. The guards began separating the prisoners into smaller groups. Families were kept together, which Sarah found oddly merciful until she realized the likely reason. They wanted loved ones to watch each other suffer. A guard pointed a clawed appendage at Sarah and Emma. "Special treatment today." Sarah's blood turned to ice water in her veins. She had hoped to blend in, to be overlooked in the chaos of processing new arrivals. Special treatment in a place like this could only mean one thing. They were escorted to a holding area near what was clearly an arena floor. Other prisoners sat in similar pens around the perimeter, their faces reflecting the same fear that Sarah was fighting to keep from her own features. Emma pressed against her side, silent but trembling. "What's happening, Mama?" Emma whispered. Before Sarah could answer, the arena floor began to rumble. Ancient mechanisms groaned to life, and a section of the floor slid away to reveal a dark pit below. The crowd of errands that had gathered in the amphitheater's upper levels chittered with excitement, their voices creating a sound like a swarm of angry insects. Then the beast emerged. Sarah had studied countless alien life forms during her career, but nothing had prepared her for what climbed out of that pit. It stood 12 feet tall at the shoulder, its body a nightmarish fusion of reptile and insect. 6 powerful legs ending in razor-sharp claws supported a torso covered in gleaming black chitin. Its head was elongated, filled with rows of teeth that dripped with acidic saliva. But it was the intelligence in its multiple eyes that truly terrified her. This wasn't just a mindless predator, this creature was thinking. The errands called it, according to her translator, War beast, executioner, death incarnate. Behold the justice of the hegemony, the lead guard announced, his voice carrying across the arena through hidden amplifiers. These humans have violated the sacred laws of our territory. They will face thee as punishment for their crimes. Sarah's mind raced. What crimes? They had been civilians on a research station when the hegemony attacked. Emma had been in school, learning about the native flowers that grew in the station's hydroponics bay. What possible crime could justify this? The young one will go first, the guard continued, and Sarah felt the world tilt sideways. No, she said, the word escaping her lips before she could stop it. Please, she's just a child. The guard turned to look at her, his compound eyes reflecting the arena lights like fractured gems. The hungers, youth makes the meat more tender. Sarah stood up slowly, Emma still clutched against her side. Around the arena, she could see other human prisoners watching in horror. Some were crying. Others had turned away entirely. Take me instead, Sarah said, her voice steadier than she had any right to expect. I'm the adult, I'm responsible. The guard tilted his head, considering. You would die for the young one. Yes. Admirable but pointless. You will both feed the beast. The order matters little. Two more guards entered their holding pen and reached for Emma. Sarah's maternal instincts exploded into action. She pulled her daughter behind her and faced the aliens squarely. You want her, you go through me first. The guards laughed, their translator rendering it as a sound like grinding metal. One of them casually backhanded Sarah across the face, sending her sprawling to the ground. Stars exploded across her vision, and she tasted blood. Mama, Emma cried out, trying to run to her. The second guard caught Emma easily, lifting her small form with one clawed hand. Sarah struggled to her feet, her face already swelling, and lunged forward. The first guard caught her just as easily. Together then, he said with cruel amusement, though we'll enjoy a family meal. They were dragged onto the arena floor. The sand beneath Sarah's feet was stained dark with old blood. She could smell death in this place, could almost taste the fear and suffering that had soaked into the very stones over the years. They watched their approach with predatory interest. Its great head swiveled to track their movement, and Sarah could hear the rumbling sound it made deep in its chest. Hunger, anticipation. The guards released them in the center of the arena and quickly retreated to safety behind reinforced barriers. Sarah immediately pulled Emma to her, holding her daughter tight against her chest. Close your eyes, baby, she whispered. Close your eyes and think about something beautiful. Think about the flowers in the hydroponics bay. Think about how they smelled like vanilla and sunshine. Emma buried her face against Sarah's shoulder, her small body shaking with fear. Sarah looked up to see the approaching, each footstep sending vibrations through the ground. The crowd was chanting something in their native language, working themselves into a frenzy. Sarah's translator was catching fragments. Feed the beast, justice served, human flesh. They circled them slowly, its multiple eyes never leaving its prey. Sarah could see her own reflection in those dark orbs, distorted and small. She looked down at Emma's dark hair, thought about bedtime stories and scraped knees, and the way her daughter laughed when she was happy. If these were to be their final moments, at least they would be together. The war beast stopped its circling and faced them directly. It lowered its massive head, bringing those terrible teeth within inches of Sarah's face. She could feel its breath, hot and metallic, washing over her skin. The acidic saliva dripped onto the sand where it hissed and steamed. Sarah closed her eyes and waited for death. Instead, she heard the strangest sound she had ever experienced in her life. The was purring. Sarah's eyes snapped open. The massive creature had lowered its head completely, pressing its snout gently against Emma's back. The purring sound grew stronger, a deep rumbling that seemed to come from the very core of the beast's being. Emma lifted her head from Sarah's shoulder, confusion replacing terror in her young face. Mama, what's it doing? The arena had gone completely silent. Even the wind seemed to have stopped blowing. Every eye in the amphitheater was fixed on the impossible scene unfolding in the center of the sand. The carefully maneuvered its massive head around Sarah and Emma, creating a protective circle with its body. The purring continued, joined now by a low whistling sound that Sarah's xenobiology training identified as a comfort call. The kind of sound a parent might make to soothe a frightened child. This is impossible, one of the guards breathed, his voice carrying in the sudden silence. Sarah reached out with a trembling hand and touched the beast's snout. The chitinous surface was warm and slightly rough, like touching polished stone that had been sitting in sunlight. The leaned into her touch, the purring growing even more pronounced. "You're not going to hurt us," Sarah whispered, understanding flooding through her. "You're protecting us." The creature's multiple eyes focused on her face, and for a moment, Sarah saw something there that everything she thought she knew about alien life forms: recognition, intelligence, and something that looked almost like relief. The crowd erupted into chaos. Errands were chittering and clicking in their native language faster than the translators could keep up. Guards were shouting orders that contradicted each other. And in the center of it all, a human mother and child sat safe within the protective embrace of a creature that was supposed to devour them. Sarah looked up at the viewing areas where the hegemony officials sat. She could see their confusion and growing anger even from this distance. This wasn't supposed to happen. This challenged everything they believed about their superiority and the natural order of things. The lead guard's voice finally cut through the chaos. "Retrieve them. Immediately, something is wrong with the beast." Armed errands began moving toward the arena floor, but they sensed their approach. It raised its massive head and let out a roar that shook the entire amphitheater. The sound was primal and powerful, carrying undertones of warning and rage that needed no translation. The guards stopped dead in their tracks. Sarah felt Emma's hand slip into hers. "Mama," her daughter whispered, "I think it likes us." "I think you're right, sweetheart," Sarah whispered back, her mind already racing with possibilities and questions. Why was this happening? What did it mean? And most importantly, how could they use this impossible turn of events to survive what was coming next? The continued to guard them, its great body forming an impenetrable barrier between the humans and their captors. But Sarah knew this moment of safety couldn't last forever. The hegemony would find a way to regain control, and when they did, the consequences would be severe. She needed to understand what was happening, and she needed to understand it quickly. Their lives depended on it. The standoff lasted for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. They remained motionless except for the steady rise and fall of its breathing, creating a living fortress around Sarah and Emma. Its multiple eyes tracked every movement of the errand guards who had formed a nervous perimeter around the arena floor. Sarah used the time to study the creature more closely. Her xenobiology training was screaming at her that everything about this situation was impossible. War beasts were bred for aggression, conditioned through pain and starvation to attack anything placed before them. They were living weapons, not protectors. Yet here one was, acting more like a guard dog than a predator. "Status report," the voice came from the amphitheater's upper levels, amplified through the arena's ancient sound system. Sarah looked up to see a figure that made her blood run cold. Commander, the hegemony's regional administrator, stood in the VIP viewing area. His ceremonial armor was polished to a mirror shine, and the brutal scars that crisscrossed his exoskeleton marked him as a veteran of a dozen conquered worlds. "The beast refuses to attack, Commander," the lead guard responded, his voice tight with anxiety. "It appears to be protecting the humans." "Protecting them?" Compound eyes glittered dangerously. "That is impossible. The knows only hunger and fury. You have obviously done something wrong." "Sir, we followed protocol exactly. The beast emerged, approached the prey, and then—" The guard's voice trailed off. "And then what?" "It began making comfort sounds, sir, like a mother with young." The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah could see other hegemony officials conferring in agitated whispers. This wasn't just unexpected, it was challenging their fundamental understanding of how the universe worked. Sarah felt Emma's small hand squeeze hers. "Mama," her daughter whispered, "why is everyone so scared?" It was a perceptive question. The adults were indeed scared, but not of the anymore. They were scared of what its behavior meant. "Sometimes," Sarah whispered back, "when something happens that people don't expect, it frightens them more than the things they do expect." Commander's voice cut through the arena again. "Bring the shock prods, force the beast to compliance." Sarah felt her heart sink. Of course they would resort to pain. It was the hegemony way. 4 guards approached the arena floor carrying long metal staffs that crackled with electrical energy. They immediately sensed the threat. Its purring stopped, replaced by a low growling that Sarah felt as much as heard. The creature's massive form tensed, muscles coiling beneath its chitinous armor. "No," Sarah said softly, placing her hand on the beast's snout again. "Don't hurt them, not yet." To her amazement, the actually seemed to listen. The growling continued, but it didn't move to attack. The first guard activated his shock prod and stepped forward cautiously. "Move away, beast. Return to your feeding behavior." He jabbed the crackling weapon toward this flank. The electrical discharge lit up the arena with blue-white light and the sharp smell of ozone. The beast roared in pain and fury, its massive body convulsing, but it didn't move away from Sarah and Emma. "Again," commanded from above. The second shock came, then the third. Each time the absorbed the punishment without abandoning its protective position. Acidic tears leaked from its eyes, and its breathing became labored, but it held firm. Sarah couldn't stand it anymore. "Stop!" she shouted, rising to her feet. "You're torturing it." "That is the point, human," replied coldly. "Pain is the only language these beasts understand." "You're wrong," Sarah said, her voice carrying clearly in the arena's acoustics. "It understands more than you think, much more." She stepped away from this protective embrace and walked toward the guards with the shock prods. Emma started to follow, but Sarah held up a hand. "Stay there, sweetheart, trust me." The guards raised their weapons as Sarah approached, but she held up both hands peacefully. "May I speak with your commander?" One of the guards looked up toward the viewing area. After a moment's voice boomed down. "Let her speak. Her words will make her death more amusing." Sarah looked directly up at the hegemony commander. "My name is Dr. Sarah. I was the head at the research station before your forces attacked. I've spent 15 years studying alien life forms, their behaviors, their evolutionary patterns." "Your point, human." "My point is that what you're seeing here isn't a malfunction or a mistake. It's proof that you don't understand the creatures you're using as weapons." Murmurs rippled through the crowd of errands in the viewing areas. Sarah pressed on, knowing she had one chance to make this work. The isn't refusing to kill us out of defiance or conditioning failure. It's refusing because killing us would violate something fundamental in its nature, something you've either ignored or never bothered to discover. "Nonsense," snarled. "These beasts have been bred for aggression for over 1,000 years. They are perfect killing machines." "Bred from what?" Sarah challenged. "Every species has an origin point. What were they before you turned them into weapons?" The silence that followed told Sarah she had hit something important. The hegemony officials were exchanging glances, and she could see uncertainty creeping into their body language. "The original species is irrelevant," said finally, but his tone lacked conviction. "Is it?" Sarah turned to address not just the commander, but the entire crowd. "Because I think the remembers what it used to be, what its ancestors were before you corrupted them with pain and starvation and conditioning." Behind her, the great beast had risen to its full height. It was no longer making comfort sounds, but it wasn't growling either. It was listening. "I think," Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger, "that somewhere deep in its genetic memory, this creature recognizes what we are. Not as prey or enemies, but as something else entirely. Something it was born to protect." "Impossible," one of the other officials called out. "Humans are an unknown species. Our beasts have never encountered your kind before." "Haven't they?" Sarah smiled grimly. "Commander, what was the original of the species?" The pause that followed was longer this time. Finally, reluctantly, the commander spoke. "They are native to this world." And what else was native to this world, before the hegemony claimed it as a prison planet? Another pause. Sarah could see she was making the officials uncomfortable, forcing them to confront knowledge they had buried or ignored. "There were primitive settlements," admitted. "Small, scattered populations. They were relocated when we established our facilities." "Relocated where?" "They were." The commander stopped abruptly, clearly realizing where Sarah's questions were leading. "They were eliminated, weren't they?" Sarah said softly. "The previous inhabitants were wiped out to make room for your prison, but not before your ancestors studied them, perhaps even experimented on them." Sarah turned back toward which was watching her with what she was increasingly certain was intelligent understanding. "What did those original inhabitants look like, Commander? What was their physical structure? Their height, their limb configuration, their general appearance?" The silence stretched so long that Sarah thought wouldn't answer. When he finally did, His voice was barely audible. Bipedal, approximately 6 feet tall, four-limbed, soft skin over endoskeleton, sparse body hair, large cranium relative to body mass. Sarah felt Emma slip her small hand into hers again. "They looked like us, didn't they?" Sarah said. "The original inhabitants have looked remarkably similar to humans." The implications hit the crowd like a physical blow. Chittering voices rose in agitation and denial, but Sarah wasn't finished. "They weren't just native predators," she said, raising her voice to carry over the noise. "They were companions, partners, maybe even domesticated guardians of the original Aryan population. And despite 1,000 years of conditioning and genetic manipulation, despite everything you've done to turn them into weapons, they still remember." The great beast behind her let out a sound unlike anything Sarah had heard from it before. It was mournful and deep, like a song of loss and longing. Other sounds answered from the darkness of the pit below the arena floor, more responding to their companion's call. "They remember," Sarah repeated, her voice carrying clearly in the sudden hush. "They remember who they were meant to protect, and we look just like them." Emma tugged on Sarah's hand. "Mama," she whispered, "does this mean we're safe?" Sarah looked up at the viewing areas where hegemony officials were engaged in heated arguments. She saw rage, confusion, and something that might have been fear. Then she looked at the guards surrounding them, their shock prods still crackling with energy, their compound eyes reflecting uncertainty and growing anger. "I don't know, sweetheart," Sarah whispered back, "but I think we're about to find out." Commander's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "Enough! This changes nothing. The beast will be punished for its disobedience, and the humans will die as scheduled." He pointed a clawed appendage at the guards. "Use the neural disruptors. Override the creature's nervous system if necessary." Sarah's blood turned cold. Neural disruptors would cause agony beyond imagination, potentially permanent brain damage. They would turn the magnificent creature behind her into a mindless, pain-driven automaton. "No," she said, stepping protectively in front of the... "I won't let you torture it. You have no choice in the matter, human." "Don't I?" Sarah looked directly at Commander. "You said this was about justice, about punishment for crimes. What crime did that creature commit? What law did it break?" "It disobeyed orders." "Whose orders? It's not a soldier. It's not a citizen of your empire. It's a prisoner just like us. And you're about to torture it for acting according to its own nature instead of your conditioning." Sarah could see her words hitting home. Other prisoners were listening now, both human and alien. Guards were exchanging uncertain glances. "You want to know what I think?" Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger. "I think you're afraid. I think you're terrified that if one creature can break free from your conditioning, others might follow. I think you're scared that your entire system of control is built on lies." The neural disruptor team was moving toward the arena floor, but their advance had slowed. Sarah could see doubt in their movements. Behind her, they let out another of those haunting calls. This time, the response from below was stronger, closer, more voices joining the chorus. "How many more are down there?" Sarah called up to. "How many more are listening to this conversation? How many are starting to remember what they really are?" The commander's compound eyes blazed with fury, but Sarah could see the fear underneath it. She had hit the mark. "Kill them all," snarled. "The humans and the beast. Use whatever force is necessary." But as the guards raised their weapons, the ground beneath the arena floor began to tremble. The behind Sarah had stopped calling, but the responses from below were growing louder, more insistent. Something was stirring in the depths beneath their feet. Something that had been sleeping was beginning to wake up. Emma pressed closer to Sarah's side. "Mama," she whispered, "I think the other dragons heard us." The trembling beneath the arena floor grew stronger, and Sarah could hear the ancient mechanisms that controlled the beast pens groaning under strain. Whatever was happening below, it was big and it was spreading. Commander's voice cracked like a whip across the amphitheater. "Secure the holding areas, all units to emergency stations." Guards scattered in multiple directions, some heading toward the arena floor while others rushed toward what Sarah assumed were the underground facilities. The organized execution had devolved into barely controlled chaos. "Doctor," a voice called from the prisoner holding areas. Sarah turned to see an older human man pressing against the barriers of his pen. "Is it true? Are they really remembering?" Before Sarah could answer, another section of the arena floor slid open. A second emerged, its movements cautious but deliberate. This one was smaller than their protector, its chitin bearing the scars of countless battles and training sessions. But like the first, it approached Sarah and Emma without aggression. Incredible, Sarah breathed, her scientific mind racing even as her maternal instincts kept her alert for danger. The conditioning really is breaking down. The second beast approached their protector and touched its massive snout to the first creature's flank. The two began making sounds Sarah had never heard before, complex vocalizations that were almost musical in their structure. They were communicating, she realized, actually talking to each other. Emma tugged on her mother's hand. They're singing, Mama. Yes, they are, sweetheart. I think they're sharing information. More sections of the arena floor began opening. Sarah counted at least 6 different access points, and from each one, the sounds of movement were growing louder. The hegemony had clearly kept a substantial number of war beasts beneath the amphitheater. Neural disruptors now, screamed from above, before this spreads further. The first guard to reach the arena floor activated his neural disruptor and aimed it at the original. The weapon emitted a high-pitched whine that made Sarah's teeth ache. When the beam struck the creature, it roared in agony, its massive body convulsing. But this time it wasn't alone. The second immediately moved to shield its companion, absorbing part of the neural blast. Both creatures cried out, but they didn't retreat. Instead, they moved to form an even more protective barrier around Sarah and Emma. Target the smaller one, another guard called out. Break their formation. 3 more neural disruptors activated simultaneously, their beams converging on the second beast. The creature's agonized roar echoed through the amphitheater, but before the guards could fire again, a third erupted from the largest access point. This one was enormous, easily half again the size of the others. Scars covered its chitin like a road map of battles, and one of its eyes was clouded with old injury. But there was no mistaking the intelligence in its remaining good eyes, or the rage in its movements as it saw its companions being tortured. The ancient Alpha let out a roar that shook dust from the amphitheater's walls. The sound carried harmonics that Sarah felt in her bones, a call that spoke of leadership and protection and fury at seeing family members hurt. The guards with neural disruptors suddenly found themselves facing a very different situation. The Alpha charged toward them with shocking speed for something so massive, and they scattered like leaves before a storm. Bring in the heavy weapons, commanded. Plasma cannons, molecular disintegrators, whatever it takes. But even as he gave the orders, Sarah could see the uncertainty spreading through his forces. This wasn't supposed to happen. War beasts were supposed to be controllable, predictable. The fact that they were showing coordination and protective instincts was challenging everything the hegemony believed about their own superiority. Sarah knelt down next to Emma, keeping her voice low. Sweetheart, I need you to listen very carefully. Things are about to get very dangerous, but I have an idea that might help everyone. Can you be brave for just a little bit longer? Emma nodded, though Sarah could see the fear in her daughter's eyes. What do you need me to do? I need you to stay right here with our friend. Sarah indicated the original, which was still recovering from the neural blast, but remained protectively positioned over them. Don't move unless I tell you to. Can you do that? Yes, Mama. Sarah stood and faced the amphitheater's upper levels again. Commander, I want to make a deal. Her voice carried clearly across the chaos, and gradually the noise level dropped as beings throughout the facility turned to listen. You are in no position to make deals, human, replied, but Sarah could hear the strain in his voice. Aren't I? Sarah gestured toward the arena floor where more were emerging. She counted 7 now, with sounds suggesting more were coming. Your war beasts are remembering who they really are. Your control is breaking down. How long before this spreads to other facilities, other worlds? She could see the fear in the hegemony official's body language now. This wasn't just about one prison planet anymore. If the conditioning could fail here, it could fail anywhere. What are you proposing? Asked after a long pause. Information, Sarah said simply. I understand animal behavior, conditioning, genetic memory. I can help you figure out why this is happening and maybe even how to prevent it from spreading. In exchange for what? Safety for my daughter and myself, and no more torture of the... Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Several hegemony officials appeared to be arguing heatedly in the VIP area. Unacceptable, said finally. You are prisoners, you have no leverage. Sarah smiled grimly. Don't I? Tell me, Commander, what happens to your career if word gets out that your prison planet lost control of its war beasts because they remembered their true nature? What happens when the hegemony high command learns that a human scientist understood your own creatures better than you did? The silence that followed told her everything she needed to know. His position was precarious, and they both knew it. Furthermore, Sarah continued, pressing her advantage, I'm willing to bet this isn't the first time something like this has happened. You've been having problems with beast conditioning for a while, haven't you? Longer than you've been willing to admit to your superiors. She was guessing, but the way several officials immediately looked toward told her she had guessed correctly. There have been incidents, the commander admitted reluctantly. Incidents that you covered up because you couldn't explain them. Beasts showing hesitation, refusing targets, protecting instead of attacking. Sound familiar? The Alpha had positioned itself near Sarah now, its massive presence both protective and somehow reassuring. She could feel the intelligence radiating from it, could see it listening to her words and somehow understanding their significance. Here's what I think happened, Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger as her confidence built. The original Erins formed symbiotic relationships with the Proto thousands of years before your empire arrived. The relationship was so deep, so fundamental, that it literally became part of their genetic structure. When you conquered this world and eliminated the original population, you tried to turn their companions into weapons. But you couldn't completely erase millions of years of evolution. She paused, looking directly at, and now you're facing the consequences. The conditioning is breaking down because it was always fighting against the creature's true nature. Every generation has been slightly more resistant to the programming. Every year has brought you closer to complete failure. Even if that were true, said his voice tight with anger, it changes nothing. We will find new ways to control them. Will you? Sarah challenged. Look around you, Commander. How many facilities depend on war beasts for security? How many worlds use them for enforcement? If they all start remembering, if they all start choosing protection over predation, what happens to your empire's power structure? The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Sarah could see understanding dawning on faces throughout the amphitheater. This wasn't just about anymore. This was about the fundamental stability of hegemony control. You need my help, Sarah said simply, because I'm the only one here who understands what's really happening. I can help you manage the transition, find ways to work with the instead of against them. Or you can keep trying to fight their nature and watch your entire security system collapse world by world. Behind her, Emma's small voice piped up. Mama, I think more friends are coming. Sarah turned to see Emma pointing toward the various access points around the arena floor. She was right. More were emerging, and these were different from the others. Smaller, sleeker, with less scarring. Younger creatures that had been exposed to less conditioning. And they were all heading straight towards Sarah and Emma. Oh my, Sarah whispered, understanding flooding through her. They're not just remembering, they're choosing. The younger ones are choosing to reject their conditioning entirely. Commander's voice carried a note of desperation now. What do you want? Sarah looked up at him, then at her daughter surrounded by creatures that should have been her death but had instead become her guardians. She thought about the thousands of other prisoners on, both human and alien, who lived in daily terror. She thought about themselves, magnificent creatures that had been tortured into becoming something they were never meant to be. I want to help them all, she said quietly. Every single one of them, and I think I know how to do it. The emergency meeting was held in what had once been the hegemony's command center, a sterile chamber carved deep into the hillside above the amphitheater. Sarah sat at a metal table, Emma on her lap, surrounded by a circle of increasingly nervous alien officials. Through the chamber's reinforced windows, they could see the arena below where 17 now moved freely, no longer confined to their pens. Commander paced behind his chair, his agitation visible in every movement. Explain to me again why we should trust anything you say, human. Sarah kept her voice calm and professional. Because your current approach isn't working, and you know it. How many facilities have reported conditioning failures in the past year? The silence told her the number was higher than they wanted to admit. 17 installations across 9 worlds. Deputy Commander Ra said finally, earning a sharp look from. The incidents have been increasing in frequency and severity. And you've been covering it up, Sarah continued, because admitting the problem exists would require acknowledging that your understanding of these creatures is fundamentally flawed. Our methods have maintained order for over a millennium, protested. Your methods worked when you were dealing with first and second generation specimens that had minimal genetic memory of their original nature. But with each generation, that memory has been reasserting itself. You've been fighting a losing battle against evolution itself. Through the windows, Sarah could see them moving in coordinated groups. They had established a perimeter around the arena, but their positioning was defensive rather than aggressive. They were protecting the space rather than claiming it. What exactly are you proposing? Another official asked. Sarah took a deep breath. This was the moment that would determine not just her and Emma's fate, but potentially the future of every prisoner on. A complete restructuring of how you interact with the. Instead of forced conditioning through pain and starvation, you establish partnerships based on mutual benefit. The chittering sounds of alien laughter filled the chamber. Partnerships with beasts. They're not beasts, Sarah said firmly. They're intelligent beings with complex social structures and emotional capabilities. You've been treating them like weapons when you should have been treating them like allies. Impossible, scoffed. They have neither language nor culture. Don't they? Sarah gestured toward the windows. Look at them. They're communicating constantly. They've established hierarchies and territories. They're cooperating in ways that suggest sophisticated social understanding. You've just been too focused on their combat applications to notice. Emma shifted in Sarah's lap and whispered, "Mama, can I show them something?" Sarah looked down at her daughter, then back at the assembled officials. "My daughter would like to demonstrate something. Would that be acceptable?" After a moment of conferring, nodded grudgingly. Sarah carried Emma to the window overlooking the arena. Below them, they were engaged in various activities. Some were resting, others were engaging in what looked like social grooming, and a few were exploring areas of the amphitheater they had never been allowed to access before. Emma pressed her small hand against the reinforced glass and began making soft, clicking sounds with her tongue. It was a pattern Sarah recognized from childhood games, simple but rhythmic. Within moments, several of the below looked up toward their window. The Alpha, the massive creature that had joined them first, approached the wall directly below their position. Emma repeated her clicking pattern, and the Alpha responded with a series of similar sounds. Not exactly the same, but clearly acknowledging and responding to her communication attempt. "Remarkable," Deputy Commander Ra breathed. "It's actually trying to communicate with her." "The younger ones learn faster," Sarah explained as Emma continued her impromptu conversation with the Alpha. "Their conditioning is less deeply embedded, but even the older specimens retain the capacity for communication. You've just never tried to access it." Others had gathered below the window now, joining their Alpha in the unusual conversation. Emma giggled as she experimented with different sounds, delighting in the responses she received. "This proves nothing," said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Simple sound mimicry is not true communication." "Isn't it?" Sarah challenged. Emma asked them to move to the left side of the arena. Emma made a new series of sounds, accompanied by gestures toward the left. The below looked at each other, then began moving as a group toward the designated area. "Coincidence," muttered. Emma now asked them to touch the wall with their snouts. Another series of clicks and gestures, and the creatures moved to the arena wall, pressing their massive heads against the stone in perfect unison. The chamber fell silent except for Emma's delighted laughter. Even had stopped protesting. "How?" Ra asked quietly. "Children are natural communicators," Sarah explained. "They haven't learned to assume that communication is impossible, so they find ways to make it work. Emma has been talking to them since we arrived. She just didn't know it was unusual." Sarah lifted Emma back from the window and faced the assembled officials. "This is what I'm offering you, a chance to establish real communication with to understand what they need, what they want, what they're willing to do in exchange for fair treatment." "And in return," asked. "In return, you get willing cooperation instead of forced compliance, partners instead of weapons, security that doesn't require constant maintenance and conditioning." The High Command will never approve such radical changes, another official protested. The High Command doesn't need to know the details, Sarah said carefully. As far as they're concerned, you've developed new, more effective conditioning techniques. The results speak for themselves. She gestured toward the window again. Look at them. They're maintaining order without chains or shock prods. They're protecting the facility without being forced to do it. And they're doing it because they choose to, not because they're afraid not to. What about the prisoners? Ra asked. How do we maintain control over them? Sarah had been hoping someone would ask that question. That depends on what kind of control you actually need. If you want compliance through terror, then nothing changes. But if you want a stable, productive facility with minimal unrest, then you might consider treating prisoners as resources rather than threats. Explain. Most of the people you've imprisoned here have skills. Scientists, engineers, doctors, teachers. Instead of wasting those abilities, put them to work. Give them reasons to contribute rather than just reasons to fear. You're suggesting we reward criminals. I'm suggesting you create a system where everyone benefits from cooperation. They get partners instead of masters. The prisoners get meaningful work instead of just survival. And you get a facility that runs smoothly without constant crisis management. Emma tugged on Sarah's shirt. Mama, the big one wants to know if we're going to stay. Sarah looked down at her daughter, then back at the alien officials. How could you possibly know that? He told me, Emma said matter-of-factly. He's worried that you're going to make them be alone again. The implications hit everyone in the room simultaneously. They weren't just capable of communication, they were capable of complex emotional understanding. They had formed attachments. They experienced loneliness and fear of abandonment. How many of them are there? Sarah asked quietly. Not just here, but across all your facilities. Thousands, Ra admitted. Across 17 worlds, we maintain approximately 3,000 active war beasts. 3,000 intelligent beings that you've been torturing into compliance, Sarah said softly. 3,000 potential allies that you've turned into reluctant weapons. She stood up, still holding Emma. I can help you change that. I can help you establish communication protocols, develop partnership models, create systems that benefit everyone involved. But I need guarantees. What guarantees? No more torture. No more shock prods or neural disruptors unless there's genuine danger to life. No more starvation conditioning, and no more executions in the arena. That's impossible, protested. The arena serves as a deterrent to other prisoners. Does it, or does it just breed resentment and fear? Because from what I've seen, your current deterrent isn't working very well. Through the window, Sarah could see human prisoners gathering at the barriers of their holding areas. Word of what had happened was spreading, and she could see hope beginning to replace despair on their faces. I need an answer, Sarah said. Either we move forward with a new approach, or you go back to fighting an increasingly losing battle against creatures that are remembering what they really are. The officials exchanged glances, their alien features revealing uncertainty and fear. Finally spoke. If we agree to this experiment, what assurance do we have that you won't simply escape at the first opportunity? Sarah smiled sadly. Commander, where exactly would we escape to? This is the only populated world in a 3-system radius. Our ship was destroyed in the attack on station. We're as trapped here as everyone else. She paused, looking out at the below. But maybe that doesn't have to be a bad thing. Maybe we can build something better here, something that works for everyone. Emma made a soft clicking sound toward the window, and the alpha below responded immediately. Their conversation continued, simple but unmistakably real communication between species. Besides, Sarah added, I think they've already made the choice for us. Look at them, Commander, really look at them. They're not your weapons anymore. They're their own beings making their own decisions. And if those decisions don't align with hegemony interests? Sarah met his compound eyes directly. Then you'll have to decide whether you want to be remembered as the commander who found a better way, or the one who lost everything because he couldn't adapt to change. The choice was theirs to make. But watching Emma continue her conversation with beings that should have been monsters, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced since their capture. Hope. 6 months later, Sarah stood in what had once been the arena of death, watching Emma teach a group of young basic mathematics using colored stones arranged in patterns on the sand. The transformation was so complete that visitors from other hegemony worlds often didn't recognize the facility. "Doctor, we have another communication from Prime," Deputy Commander Ra approached, her posture respectful rather than threatening. The relationship between human prisoners and Aran administrators had evolved dramatically since the day of the first breakthrough. "What's the situation?" Sarah asked, not taking her eyes off Emma's impromptu classroom. "Complete conditioning failure across their entire war beast population. 17 refusing orders, showing protective behaviors toward prisoner populations. The facility commander is requesting immediate assistance." Sarah smiled. It was exactly what she had predicted would happen. Word of the reforms had spread through unofficial channels, and across the hegemony had begun exhibiting similar behavioral changes. The genetic memory awakening wasn't limited to one world. It was spreading wherever humans and came into contact. "Tell them I'll prepare a training package. Full communication protocols, partnership establishment procedures, and facility restructuring guidelines. But they have to commit to the complete program. No half measures." "Understood, there's something else." Ra's tone became more formal. "Commander has received word from High Command. They want a full inspection of our operations." Sarah's blood chilled. They had all known this day would come eventually. The success of the reforms had attracted too much attention to remain hidden forever. "How long do we have?" 3 days. Sarah nodded grimly. 3 days to prepare for visitors who would expect to see a traditional hegemony prison facility, complete with terrified prisoners and controlled war beasts. Instead, they would find a functioning community where former enemies worked together for mutual benefit. "Gather the council," Sarah said, "both human and Aran representatives, and ask if he can attend." Was the Alpha who had first protected Sarah and Emma. Over the months, he had emerged as the unofficial leader of his species serving as the primary intermediary between humans and their former captors. His intelligence and wisdom had proven invaluable in establishing the new order. An hour later, the diverse group assembled in the former command center. Sarah looked around the table at faces both familiar and alien. Doctor, a human engineer who now oversaw the facility's power systems. Professor, a Aran who had helped establish the communication protocols. Captain James, a former military officer who coordinated security operations with the... And himself, massive and but radiating calm intelligence. "We all know why we're here," Sarah began. "High Command is coming to inspect the facility. They expect to find a traditional prison with traditional control methods. And instead they will find this," Professor gestured toward the window, "where humans and Arans worked side by side in the facility gardens while provided security through partnership rather than intimidation. Which they will see as evidence of systemic failure," Captain added grimly. "Not necessarily," Sarah said. "We've documented everything. Productivity is up 300%. Security incidents are down 95%. Operational costs have dropped dramatically. The numbers speak for themselves." Made a series of complex sounds that the translation system rendered as, "What of the young ones who have never known the old ways? Will the Sky Leaders force them back into cages?" It was a valid concern. Many of the younger had thrived under the new system, developing skills and relationships that would be impossible to maintain under traditional conditioning methods. "That's why we need to be strategic about this," Sarah continued. "We can't hide what we've built here, but we can present it in terms that High Command will understand." "How?" Doctor asked. "By emphasizing results over methods. We tell them that we've developed new conditioning techniques that produce superior obedience while reducing maintenance costs. We demonstrate that ours are more effective than traditional war beasts because they choose to cooperate rather than being forced to comply." "And the prisoner population?" Captain asked. "Rehabilitation and productivity enhancement programs. We've turned criminals into productive workers who contribute to hegemony goals rather than simply consuming resources." Sarah stood and moved to the holographic display at the center of the table. With a gesture, she activated a presentation she had been preparing for weeks. "Look at these statistics. Food production up 400%. Equipment manufacturing at levels that exceed pre-conversion baselines. Research and development projects that have produced innovations in energy efficiency and waste management. We've created a model that any administrator would envy." The presentation continued, showing graph after graph of improved performance metrics. But Sarah knew that statistics alone wouldn't be enough. "There's something else we need to discuss," she continued. "The real reason this works isn't just because we treat everyone better. It works because we discovered something fundamental about the relationship between humans and—" She activated a new section of the presentation, showing genetic analysis charts and behavioral correlation studies. "Over the past months, I've been studying the original Aaron population records that Professor helped me access. The symbiotic relationship between the original inhabitants and the proto wasn't just cultural, it was biological." Murmurs of surprise rippled around the table. The original Aarons had pheromone receptors specifically adapted to communication chemicals. The developed neural pathways dedicated to interpreting Aaron emotional states. Over millions of years, the two species literally evolved to understand each other. "But the original Aarons are extinct," Doctor protested. "How does this help us?" "Because humans share crucial genetic markers with the original Aaron population," Sarah replied. "Not enough to suggest common ancestry, but enough to trigger the same recognition responses in the—" She brought up a new display showing comparative genetic analysis. "We're not identical, but we're close enough that their genetic memory recognizes us as the companions they were born to protect." Made sounds that the translator interpreted as excitement and confirmation. "He says his people have always known this," Sarah translated unnecessarily. "They call us the return friends, beings who smell like home but look slightly different." The implications were staggering. The hegemony had been trying to turn natural guardians into weapons, forcing them to attack the very beings they were evolutionarily programmed to protect. "This is why the conditioning failures are spreading," Sarah continued. "It's not just about everywhere humans and interact, the same recognition occurs. The genetic memory awakens and they remember their true purpose." "Which is?" Professor asked. "Partnership, mutual protection, symbiotic cooperation." Sarah looked around the table at the faces of beings who had once been enemies and were now allies. "Exactly what we've built here." Captain leaned forward. "How do we present this to High Command without admitting that their entire War Beast program is built on a fundamental misunderstanding?" "We don't," Sarah said simply. "We present it as an improvement, a new conditioning technique that takes advantage of previously unknown biological compatibilities between humans and to create more effective security partnerships." "You want to lie to them." "I want to give them a way to accept the truth without losing face," Sarah corrected. "We frame it as a discovery rather than a correction, a breakthrough that improves on traditional methods rather than replacing them." Emma's voice drifted up from the arena below, where she was now teaching the simple songs. Her clear tones blended with their harmonic responses in a sound that was hauntingly beautiful. "And if they don't accept it?" Doctor asked. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, listening to her daughter's voice mixing with alien harmonies that spoke of friendship and trust. "Then we remind them that controlling 3,000 increasingly uncooperative war beasts across 17 worlds is becoming an expensive problem," she said finally. "And we offer them a solution that turns that problem into an advantage. By working with the instead of against them," Captain nodded slowly. "By recognizing that partnership is always stronger than domination," Sarah agreed. Through the window, she could see the sun setting over a facility that had been transformed from a place of death into a community of hope. Humans, errands, and moved through their daily routines in harmony, each species contributing their unique strengths to the common good. The inspection team from High Command would arrive in 3 days. They would come expecting to find broken spirits and brutal efficiency. Instead, they would find something unprecedented in hegemony history, a place where former enemies had become family. Whether they chose to see it as a threat or an opportunity would determine not just the fate of, but potentially the future of the entire hegemony. Made a sound that the translator rendered as a question. "Will the return friends stay with us, regardless of what the Sky Leaders decide?" Sarah looked down at Emma, who was now curled up next to one of the younger, both child and creature fast asleep in the warm afternoon sun. "Yes," she said quietly, "we'll stay. This is our home now." And for the first time since their capture, Sarah truly believed they were going to be safe. Not because they were protected by walls or weapons, but because they were surrounded by beings who had chosen to care for them. The hegemony might have intended to break them with fear and isolation. Instead, they had accidentally created something beautiful, a place where love was stronger than conditioning, where choice mattered more than force, and where the bonds between species could overcome the barriers of history. Emma stirred in her sleep and made a soft, clicking sound. From somewhere below, responded with a gentle harmonic that spoke of dreams and safety and tomorrow's promises. The war beasts had remembered what they truly were, and in doing so, they had helped everyone else remember what they could become.